New Eden was not the peaceful quiet of space, but the suffocating emptiness that comes after a scream has been cut short. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the massive holographic display in the United Earth Defense Command's war room, her weathered hands trembling as she watched the final moments of humanity's most prosperous outer colony play out in horrifying detail. The attack had been swift, merciless, and utterly devastating. The Zephyrian Collective, a species humanity had encountered only twice in diplomatic exchanges, had descended upon New Eden like a plague of metal locusts. Their ships, sleek biomechanical monstrosities that seemed to merge technology with something disturbingly organic, had emerged from hyperspace without warning, without provocation, without even the courtesy of a declaration of war. New Eden had been home to 12 million souls, families who had left Earth decades ago seeking new opportunities among the stars. Children who had never seen their ancestral homeworld, born under alien suns and raised in the hope of a peaceful future. Scientists, artists, engineers, teachers, all the beautiful complexity of human civilization condensed into a single, thriving world that had taken 3 generations to build. The orbital defense platforms had fought valiantly, their plasma cannons carving brilliant streaks across the planet's atmosphere as they engaged the invaders. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the defense station Prometheus, had held her position even as enemy fire tore through her hull, buying precious minutes for civilian evacuation ships to launch. Her final transmission, crackling through the static of dying communications arrays, would haunt Earth's military commanders for years to come. Tell my daughter. Tell her mommy fought like hell. But courage alone had not been enough. The Zephyrians brought weapons that Earth's military scientists had only theorized about, reality-warping devices that turned the planet's own gravity against its defenders, temporal distortion fields that aged enemy ships to scrap in seconds, and worst of all, the harvester swarms. Billions of microscopic nanobots that consumed organic matter and converted it into raw materials for the collective's war machine. The evacuation had saved perhaps 100,000 people before the planetary shields failed. Those who remained, mothers clutching infants, elderly couples who had refused to abandon the gardens they had spent decades cultivating, brave volunteers who stayed behind to maintain critical systems. They all became fuel for the Zephyrian fleet. Their bodies, their homes, their dreams, all reduced to gray industrial paste that the alien harvesters greedily consumed. Admiral Chen had watched it all through the eyes of emergency beacons scattered across New Eden's surface. She had seen families huddled in basement shelters, praying to various gods in a dozen different languages as the walls above them dissolved. She had witnessed the moment when Dr. James Ockafer, the colony's chief physician, had used his final moments to broadcast the genetic sequences of the nanobots to Earth, even as the mechanical swarm devoured him cell by cell. His sacrifice would prove crucial in the dark days ahead, but in that moment, it was simply another human life snuffed out by alien cruelty. The last transmission from New Eden had come from a 10-year-old girl named Lucy Martinez. Her parents had hidden her in an underground bunker with enough supplies for a month, hopping against hope that rescue would come. For 6 days, she had broadcast on the emergency frequency, her young voice growing thinner and more frightened with each passing hour. She told stories about her pet cat, Whiskers, and how she missed her grandmother's cookies. She asked when the bad aliens would go away, and when her mommy and daddy were coming back. On the 7th day, the transmission stopped. Now, 3 months later, Admiral Chen stood before the largest military gathering in human history. Representatives from every Earth nation, every orbital habitat, every asteroid mining station and deep space research facility had answered the call. The chamber, carved from the heart of Luna's largest mountain, buzzed with the tense energy of barely controlled rage. They have made their choice, Chen's voice carried across the assembly, each word weighted with the grief of billions. The Zephyrian Collective has shown us what they think of human life. They have demonstrated their capacity for genocide, their hunger for our destruction, their complete and utter contempt for everything we hold sacred. The holographic display shifted, showing the current disposition of Earth's military forces. 700,000 warships, from massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking moons to sleek destroyers built for speed and stealth. The largest armada ever assembled by any known species, a testament to humanity's industrial might and their talent for organized violence when sufficiently motivated. But they have also shown us something else, Chen continued, her eyes hardening like steel. They have shown us their weakness. They believe we are soft, passive, incapable of true brutality. They think that because we prefer peace, we are incapable of war. They are wrong. The assembled delegates, presidents and prime ministers, generals and admirals, corporate executives and union leaders, all nodded in grim agreement. The loss of New Eden had united humanity in a way that decades of political rhetoric never could. Earth's fractious nations had set aside their petty squabbles, their trade disputes and territorial claims suddenly seeming insignificant in the face of existential threat. President Elena Vasquez of the United Americas stood first, her voice carrying the weight of 2 billion citizens. The resources of my nation are at your disposal, Admiral. Every ship, every soldier, every manufacturing facility. We will not let New Eden's sacrifice be in vain. Premier Liu Wei of the Pan-Asian Coalition rose next, his aged face set with determination. The collective believes humanity is weak because we mourn our dead. They will learn that our grief is not weakness, it is the fuel that drives our vengeance. One by one, the leaders of Earth pledged their support. The African Union offered their advanced stealth technologies. The European Federation contributed their experimental particle weapons. The Oceanic Alliance provided their deep space navigation expertise. Even the historically neutral Swiss Confederation offered their orbital manufacturing platforms for the production of military hardware. But it was the voice of Dr. Sarah Kim, speaking for the survivors of New Eden, that brought tears to even the most hardened military officers. The young woman had lost her husband and 2 children in the attack, saved only by a cruel twist of fate that had placed her aboard a research vessel in the outer system when the Zephyrians struck. My son Tommy was 7 years old, she said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. He loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up. He had never hurt anyone, never even stepped on a bug without apologizing. The nanobots took 3 hours to consume him. I know because I found his smart watch afterward, still recording vital signs. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft sounds of grown men and women weeping. I volunteer for the mission, Dr. Kim continued. Not as a scientist, not as a civilian survivor, but as someone who understands what we're fighting for. Every world the collective touches becomes a tomb. Every species they encounter faces extinction. This isn't just about revenge. It's about ensuring that no parent, anywhere in the galaxy, ever has to watch their child die the way mine did. Admiral Chen felt the weight of command settle upon her shoulders like a lead cloak. 700,000 ships represented the military might of an entire planet, but they also represented 700,000 crews, 700,000 human beings who might not return from the war she was about to unleash. The tactical analysis was sobering. The Zephyrian Collective controlled 17 star systems, each one a fortress world protected by technologies that Earth's scientists barely understood. Their fleets were smaller than humanity's, but their weapons were devastatingly effective, and their willingness to commit genocide suggested they would not hesitate to employ any horror in their arsenal. Intelligence reports, gathered at terrible cost by deep-cover agents and automated spy probes, painted a picture of a species driven by an incomprehensible ideology. The Zephyrians seemed to view other forms of life not as potential allies or even enemies, but as resources to be harvested. They had exterminated at least 12 other species that Earth's xenobiologists knew about, each extinction adding to their industrial capacity. Most disturbing of all was the discovery of what the Zephyrians called processing worlds, planets where captured populations were kept in massive biomechanical facilities, their bodies slowly converted into raw materials, while their minds were preserved in digital matrices to serve as computational resources. The thought that New Eden's survivors might be enduring such a fate had driven several intelligence analysts to nervous breakdowns. The plan is simple in concept, Admiral Chen announced, activating a new set of holographic displays. We will divide our forces into 7 battle groups, each tasked with liberating specific Zephyrian-held systems. We will show them the same mercy they showed New Eden, none whatsoever. Every collective facility will be destroyed, every ship eliminated, every trace of their presence in our galaxy erased. The scale of the undertaking was staggering. It would require supply lines stretching across dozens of light years, coordinated strikes against fortified positions, and the kind of sustained military campaign that humanity had never attempted beyond their own solar system. The logistics alone would challenge every resource Earth possessed. General Marcus Thompson, veteran of the Martian Independence War, raised a weathered hand. "Admiral, the intelligence reports suggest the collective has been preparing for large-scale warfare for centuries. Our advantages in numbers may not be sufficient if they're technologically superior." Chen nodded grimly. "Which is why we won't fight fair. Dr. Ockhaffer's sacrifice gave us the genetic code of their nanobots. Our biochemists have developed countermeasures that should neutralize their harvester swarms. More importantly, they've created variants of our own, nanobots designed specifically to target Zephyrian biology." The room stirred uneasily. Humanity had signed numerous treaties banning the development of such weapons, considering them too dangerous and morally questionable for civilized warfare. But civilization was a luxury that the collective had stripped away when they consumed New Eden. "I won't lie to you," Chen continued. "What we're planning is genocide, not the targeted elimination of military forces or the conquest of strategic resources, but the complete and total extermination of an entire species. History will judge us harshly, and perhaps it should. But the alternative is to allow the collective to continue their harvest, to let other worlds suffer New Eden's fate, to abandon our duty to protect the innocent." Director James Harrison of Earth's Xenobiology Institute stood slowly, his face pale but resolute. "Admiral, I've spent 30 years studying alien life forms, cataloging their cultures, their achievements, their contributions to galactic diversity. The thought of deliberately causing an extinction sickens me to my core." He paused, gathering himself. "But the Zephyrians are not a culture, they are a cancer. They create nothing, preserve nothing, contribute nothing except death. If we must become monsters to stop them, then I pray history remembers why we made that choice." The vote, when it came, was unanimous. 700,000 ships, representing the combined military might of humanity, would carry Earth's vengeance to the stars. The largest military campaign in human history would begin within 6 months, as soon as the final preparations were complete. As the assembly dispersed, Admiral Chen remained before the tactical display, studying the star charts and force dispositions that would determine the fate of 2 species. Behind her, the recorded image of New Eden played on endless loop, a beautiful blue-green world that had once held so much promise, now a barren rock stripped of everything that had made it home. She thought of Lucy Martinez, the little girl whose final transmissions had broken hearts across the solar system. Somewhere among the stars, in whatever twisted facilities the collective maintained, her remains might still exist as part of their industrial apparatus. The thought filled Chen with a cold fury that would sustain her through the dark months ahead. The war would be brutal, costly, and morally ambiguous. Millions of human soldiers would die in the fighting, and an entire alien species would be erased from existence. But as Chen watched New Eden's death throes play out once again, she felt no doubt about the righteousness of their cause. The Zephyrians had sown the wind when they murdered 12 million innocents. Now they would reap the whirlwind that 700,000 human warships would bring to their doorstep. The age of humanity's innocence was over. The age of their terrible justice was about to begin. 6 months of preparation had transformed the Sol system into the largest military-industrial complex in known galactic history. Every asteroid belt hummed with automated mining operations, their robotic swarms extracting rare metals needed for advanced weaponry. The orbital shipyards around Jupiter had expanded to 3 times their original capacity, their construction bays working around the clock to retrofit civilian vessels into instruments of war. Even luxury cruise liners were being converted into troop transports, their elegant ballrooms now filled with acceleration couches and life support systems designed to keep soldiers alive during the long journey to enemy territory. Captain Elena Vasquez, daughter of the United America's president and a decorated combat veteran in her own right, stood in the command center of the UES Retribution, flagship of Battle Group Alpha. At 34, she was the youngest battle group commander in Earth's naval history, but her tactical brilliance and unwavering dedication to the cause had earned her the position despite political concerns about nepotism. The Retribution itself was a marvel of human engineering. A kilometer-long dreadnought equipped with experimental quantum torpedoes, adaptive shield matrices, and most importantly, Dr. Ockhaffer's countermeasures against Zephyrian nanotechnology. "Final systems check, all stations," Elena commanded, her voice carrying across the bridge with practiced authority. Around her, the best and brightest of Earth's military personnel prepared for humanity's first major interstellar war. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, the ship's tactical officer, reported green lights on all weapon systems. Chief Engineer Boris Petrov confirmed that the revolutionary new fusion cores were operating at optimal efficiency. Dr. Amara Osai, the ship's chief science officer and one of the few people to have actually studied captured Zephyrian technology, monitored the exotic countermeasure systems that might mean the difference between victory and annihilation. But it was the presence of Dr. Sarah Kim that gave Alina pause. The New Eden survivor had insisted on joining the mission as a civilian advisor, despite having no military training. She claimed her intimate knowledge of Zephyrian tactics, gained through the horrific experience of watching her world die, would prove invaluable. In truth, Alina suspected the woman was driven by a need for closure that only witnessing the collective's destruction could provide. "Dr. Kim," Alina said softly, approaching the civilian observation station where Sarah stood staring at the tactical displays. "You don't have to be here. No one would think less of you for remaining on Earth." Sarah turned, and Alina was struck by how much the woman had changed since the memorial service for New Eden's dead. The grief was still there, carved into the lines around her eyes and the set of her jaw, but it had been tempered by something harder. Something that reminded Alina uncomfortably of the expression she'd seen on the faces of soldiers who had lost too much to ever truly come home. "Captain, with respect, you've never watched an entire planet die," Sarah replied, her voice steady but carrying undertones of barely controlled rage. "You've never had to identify your children from dental records because there wasn't enough left of them to recognize. The collective took everything from me, my family, my world, my future. The only thing they left me was the knowledge of how they did it, and I intend to use that knowledge to make sure they never do it to anyone else." The conviction in her voice silenced any further protests Alina might have made. She had read the classified reports about what the survivors had endured, the psychological profiles that detailed the various ways trauma manifested in those who had witnessed the collective's atrocities. Sarah Kim was functional, brilliant even, but she was also fundamentally broken in ways that might never heal. Perhaps that brokenness was exactly what humanity needed in the dark campaign ahead. The jump to hyperspace came at 800 hours, Sol Standard Time. 700,000 ships, the largest military armada in galactic history, tore holes in the fabric of reality itself and disappeared into the roiling chaos of hyperspace. Battle Group Alpha, comprising 87,000 vessels, was tasked with the liberation of the Kepler 442 system, where intelligence suggested the collective maintained one of their primary processing facilities. The journey through hyperspace was a nightmare of twisted physics and impossible geometries. Even with the best inertial dampeners Earth could produce, the crew of the Retribution felt the universe twist around them as they traveled faster than light toward their destination. Many of the younger crew members experienced hyperspace sickness, violent nausea accompanied by vivid hallucinations that the ship's medical staff could only treat with heavy sedatives. Dr. Kim, surprisingly, seemed unaffected by the journey. She spent her time reviewing intelligence reports and tactical analyses, her scientific mind cataloging every piece of information about Zephyrian military doctrine. Alina often found her in the ship's library, surrounded by holographic displays showing alien ship configurations and weapon signatures, her eyes reflecting the cold light of data streams as she searched for weaknesses in an enemy that had seemed invincible just months before. "They're not supernatural," Sarah muttered during one of Alina's visits, her fingers dancing through a three-dimensional model of a Zephyrian cruiser. "They're just highly advanced. Every technology has limitations, every system has vulnerabilities. The nanobots that consumed New Eden require specific environmental conditions to function optimally. Their reality-warping weapons draw massive amounts of energy that creates detectable gravitational anomalies. They're not gods, they're just very good at killing." The breakthrough came 18 hours into the journey, when Dr. Os detected unusual quantum fluctuations in the hyperspace field surrounding their fleet. At first, the readings seemed like sensor ghosts, phantom signals created by the interaction between human technology and the chaotic energies of hyperspace. But as the patterns became more regular, more intentional, a horrifying realization dawned on the bridge crew. "Captain," Dr. Osai reported, her voice tight with controlled panic, "I'm reading multiple hyperspace signatures paralleling our course. The quantum resonance patterns match known Zephyrian propulsion systems." Alina felt ice form in her veins. "How many ships?" "At least 40,000, ma'am. Possibly more. the interference makes it difficult to get accurate readings. The tactical situation was clear and terrifying. Somehow, the Zephyrians had detected humanity's massive fleet movement and were shadowing them through hyperspace. Worse, their smaller force suggested a level of technological sophistication that Earth's military planners had underestimated. 40,000 ships confident enough to engage 700,000 human vessels meant they possessed weapons capabilities far beyond current intelligence estimates. "All stop," Elena commanded. "Signal the fleet, prepare for immediate hyperspace combat." The concept of fighting in hyperspace was largely theoretical. Human military doctrine assumed that battles would be fought in normal space, where physics behaved predictably and weapons systems functioned as designed. But the collective was forcing an engagement in the twisted reality of faster-than-light travel, where the laws of physics were more like gentle suggestions and energy weapons could behave in completely unexpected ways. The enemy struck first, their weapons tearing holes in the hyperspace field that sent shockwaves through the human fleet. The UES Defiance, a heavy cruiser carrying 3,000 souls, simply ceased to exist as a Zephyrian reality warper inverted the local spacetime around it. One moment it was there, the next there was only a sphere of twisted space where matter and energy had been compressed into a singularity the size of a marble. Elena watched in horror as more human ships fell to weapons that seemed to violate everything she understood about warfare. Zephyrian torpedoes that aged their targets to scrap metal in seconds, energy beams that turned ship hulls into exotic matter, boarding pods that somehow materialized inside enemy vessels despite functioning shields and armor. "Return fire," she commanded, knowing that conventional weapons would be largely useless in the chaotic environment of hyperspace. "All ships implement Audiobook protocol." The countermeasures that Dr. Audiobook had died to provide were humanity's only hope of survival. Specialized emitters throughout the human fleet began broadcasting quantum signatures designed to disrupt Zephyrian nanotechnology. At the same time, every ship released clouds of their own nanobots, not the harvester swarms that the collective employed, but hunter-killers designed specifically to target alien biological systems. The effect was immediate and devastating. Zephyrian ships that had seemed invincible moments before began to show signs of catastrophic system failures as their own nanobots turned against them. The quantum disruptors interfered with their reality-warping weapons, causing several collective vessels to accidentally create spatial anomalies that consumed their own formations. But the Zephyrians adapted with terrifying speed. Their remaining ships began broadcasting counterfrequencies that neutralized many of Earth's nanobots, while their fleet formations shifted to minimize the impact of the quantum disruptors. What had begun as humanity's moment of triumph quickly devolved into a grinding battle of attrition where both sides bled ships and lives in equal measure. Dr. Kim, who had been monitoring the battle from her civilian station, suddenly stood with an expression of terrible understanding on her face. "Captain, I know what they're doing. This isn't a battle, it's a test." Elena, busy coordinating the fleet's defensive formations, barely glanced at the civilian advisor. "What do you mean?" "The numbers don't match," Sarah continued urgently. 40,000 ships against our 700,000. They're not trying to win, they're trying to learn. Every weapon we use, every tactic we employ, they're recording and analyzing. They're turning this engagement into a laboratory to study human military capabilities. The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. The collective wasn't defending their territory. They were gathering intelligence for a larger campaign. Every human advantage, every secret weapon, every tactical innovation was being cataloged and countered in real time by an enemy that viewed warfare as just another form of scientific inquiry. "All ships prepare for emergency hyperspace exit," Elena commanded. "We're falling back to normal space." The transition was violent and chaotic. 700,000 human vessels tore themselves free from hyperspace in a coordinated maneuver that pushed their navigation systems to the breaking point. Many ships emerged with hull damage from the stress of rapid deceleration, while others found themselves scattered across several light-years of normal space. But they had escaped the trap, emerging in the void between star systems where conventional physics applied and human weapons could function as designed. The Zephyrian fleet, unable to follow immediately due to the quantum disruptions caused by the mass hyperspace exit, found themselves facing a reorganized enemy in humanity's preferred battleground. The second phase of the battle was everything the first had not been: brutal, direct, and absolutely merciless. Human ships formed massive battle lines, their combined firepower creating walls of plasma and antimatter that swept across the void like the wrath of angry gods. The experimental quantum torpedoes, useless in hyperspace, proved devastatingly effective against Zephyrian shields and armor. Captain Alina watched through the retribution sensors as the UES New Tokyo unleashed its entire arsenal against a collective dreadnought, the massive enemy vessel breaking apart under sustained bombardment from a dozen different weapon systems. Revenge was a cold and methodical thing, she realized, not the hot passion of individual combat, but the calculated destruction of an enemy who had forfeited any right to mercy. But even in their preferred environment, the Zephyrians proved formidable opponents. Their biomechanical ships adapted to human tactics with unsettling speed, their hulls literally evolving to resist weapon types that had proven effective just minutes before. Worse, they seemed to learn from each ship that was destroyed, with surviving vessels immediately implementing countermeasures against whatever had killed their companion. The breakthrough came when Dr. Kim, working frantically at her civilian station, discovered a pattern in the Zephyrian adaptive responses. "Captain, their evolution isn't random. It's following preset algorithms. They're not truly adapting, they're just cycling through pre-programmed defensive configurations." "Can we exploit that?" "Maybe, if we can force them to exhaust their defensive options, there should be a brief window where they're vulnerable while their systems reset. But we'd need to coordinate a fleet-wide attack using every different weapon type simultaneously." Alina nodded grimly. It would require perfect timing and coordination among hundreds of thousands of ships, exactly the kind of complex maneuver that human naval doctrine excelled at, but which few other species could even attempt. "All ships prepare for coordinated Alpha Strike," she broadcasted across the fleet command network. "We're going to show these bastards what happens when you threaten humanity's children." The attack, when it came, was a thing of terrible beauty. Quantum torpedoes and plasma cannons, particle beams and gravity bombs, exotic matter warheads and good old-fashioned nuclear weapons. Every destructive technology in humanity's arsenal unleashed simultaneously against the collective fleet. The void between the stars lit up like a newborn galaxy as 700,000 human ships spoke with one voice of absolute rage. The Zephyrian fleet, caught in the middle of an adaptive cycle, found their defensive systems overwhelmed by the sheer variety of incoming fire. Ships that had seemed invincible just moments before were torn apart by weapons they had no defense against. The surviving collective vessels, their adaptive algorithms exhausted, were picked off one by human ships that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. In the end, only 3 Zephyrian vessels escaped the massacre, their damaged hulls limping away into hyperspace carrying word of humanity's capabilities back to their masters. Alina let them go, partly because pursuit would be futile, but mostly because she wanted the collective to know what was coming for them. "Casualty report," she requested quietly, the adrenaline of battle giving way to the grim reality of warfare. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka consulted her displays with a heavy expression. 47,000 ships lost or severely damaged, ma'am. Approximately 200,000 casualties, with at least 60,000 confirmed deaths. Alina closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those lives on her shoulders. 60,000 human beings who would never see their families again, never witness the victory their sacrifice had made possible. But their deaths had not been in vain. Humanity had proven it could fight the collective on equal terms and win. Dr. Kim approached the command station, her face reflecting a complex mixture of satisfaction and renewed grief. "My children have been avenged," she said quietly, "but there are still 11 other worlds out there where human beings are suffering fates worse than death. How long until we reach Kepler 442? Alina checked the navigation displays. 18 hours at maximum hyperspace velocity, but after what we've learned about their adaptive capabilities, we'll need to modify our approach. They'll be expecting us now." "Good," Sarah replied, her voice carrying overtones of barely controlled fury. "I want them to know we're coming. I want them to spend every moment between now and our arrival knowing that their victims' families are on the way to collect what's owed. Fear is just another weapon, Captain, and it's time the collective learned what it feels like to be afraid." As the human fleet reformed its battle groups and prepared for the next phase of their campaign, Alina found herself wondering what history would make of the war they were fighting. Would future generations remember them as heroes who saved the galaxy from a genocidal threat, or as the architects of an alien species extinction? She supposed it didn't matter. The Zephyrians had made their choice when they consumed New Eden. Now humanity would show them the true meaning of consequences. 700,000 ships worth of consequences, backed by the industrial might of an entire world and the righteous fury of a species that would never again allow such atrocities to go unpunished. The age of innocence was over. The age of retribution had begun. The Kepler 442 system was a monument to industrial horror. Its 3 worlds transformed into processing centers where the collective harvested organic matter from dozens of conquered species. As Battle Group Alpha emerged from hyperspace at the system's edge, Captain Alina Vasquez felt her stomach clench at the sight displayed on the Retribution's main screen. Where planets should have shown the natural beauty of diverse ecosystems, instead there were geometric scars carved across entire continents. Vast strips of exposed bedrock where the Zephyrian harvesters had consumed everything that had once lived. "Preliminary scans complete," reported Dr. Osa, her voice professionally steady despite the tremor in her hands. 3 planetary bodies showing signs of active processing operations. Orbital infrastructure includes approximately 200 defensive platforms and... Jesus Christ! She paused, recalibrating her instruments. "Captain, I'm reading massive biosignatures from the 3rd planet. Not Zephyrian. They're keeping something alive down there. Something huge." Dr. Kim materialized at Alina's shoulder like a vengeful ghost, her civilian access codes allowing her to monitor all sensor data in real time. Her face had gone pale as she studied the readings, but her voice remained steady. "Livestock," she said with quiet horror. "They're not just harvesting dead matter anymore. They've learned to keep populations alive for continuous extraction. Those readings represent millions of sentient beings kept in a state of perpetual harvest." The tactical implications were staggering and morally devastating. If the collective had refined their techniques to keep victims alive during the extraction process, then every moment humanity delayed meant millions more beings suffering a fate worse than death. But a direct assault on the fortified worlds would result in massive human casualties and might trigger the Zephyrians to simply execute their prisoners rather than allow them to be liberated. Alina studied the tactical displays, her mind racing through possible approaches. The system's defensive network was more sophisticated than anything in Earth's intelligence files. Adaptive shield grids that could redirect energy across the entire orbital network. Automated weapons platforms that appeared to be armed with the same reality-warping technology they'd encountered in hyperspace. And most disturbing of all, what appeared to be mobile defense units that registered as neither fully mechanical nor completely biological. "Fleet composition report," she requested. 87,000 vessels operational after the hyperspace engagement, Lieutenant Commander Tanaka replied crisply. "We've got 43 dreadnoughts, including the Retribution, approximately 12,000 heavy cruisers, 38,000 destroyers and frigates, and the remainder split between support vessels and specialized assault craft." Alina nodded, then opened a secure channel to her battle group commanders. The holographic conference table materialized around her, showing the faces of humanity's finest military leaders, men and women who had trained their entire careers for conventional warfare, and were now being asked to liberate alien concentration camps while fighting an enemy that treated physics as optional. "Recommendations?" Alina asked without preamble. Admiral Liu Chen, commanding the Heavy Assault Division, spoke first. "Direct frontal assault. We have overwhelming numerical superiority, and the quantum disruptors have proven effective against their reality-warping weapons. Acceptable losses for a rapid engagement." Commodore James Harrison, whose stealth squadron had been instrumental in the hyperspace battle, disagreed. "They've had months to prepare for our arrival. Those defensive platforms aren't just weapons, they're laboratories. Every assault we launch gives them more data about our capabilities. I recommend a prolonged siege to starve them of resources." "Time we don't have," Dr. Kim interjected, her civilian status technically preventing her from participating in military planning, but her expertise making her voice impossible to ignore. "The biosignatures on that 3rd planet are fluctuating. They're accelerating the harvesting process, probably planning to consume everything before we can reach it. Every hour we debate is a death sentence for millions." The weight of command had never felt heavier to Alina. She was being asked to balance tactical necessity against humanitarian crisis, military doctrine against moral imperative. The wrong decision would result in either massive human casualties or the systematic murder of millions of innocent beings who were depending on Earth's fleet for salvation they didn't even know was coming. "Dr. Osai," Elena said finally, "what can you tell me about those hybrid defense units?" The chief science officer consulted her readings, her expression growing increasingly disturbed. "They're unprecedented, Captain. The quantum signatures suggest they're partially composed of converted organic matter, possibly the neural tissue of harvested populations. The collective appears to have developed a way to integrate consciousness into their war machines." The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. The Zephyrians weren't just harvesting bodies. They were enslaving minds, turning their victims into unwilling components of the very military apparatus that would prevent their liberation. Every defensive unit they destroyed might contain the consciousness of beings they were trying to save. Dr. Kim's reaction was immediate and visceral. She collapsed into the nearest chair, her face drained of color as the full horror of the situation became clear. "My God," she whispered. "Tommy, Lucy Martinez, all of them, they're not dead, they're slaves. The nanobots didn't just consume them, they integrated them." Elena felt the deck beneath her feet seem to shift as the moral complexity of their mission became fully apparent. They weren't just fighting to prevent future atrocities. They were being forced to potentially destroy the very victims they were trying to save. Victims who might be aware of their enslavement and praying for death that their captors would never allow. "Options," Elena demanded, her voice cutting through the horrified silence on the bridge. "The quantum disruptors," Dr. Osai said slowly, working through the implications as she spoke. "If we can modify their frequency, we might be able to disrupt the control systems without destroying the organic components. It would be incredibly risky. Too little power and it won't work. Too much and we kill everyone we're trying to save." Commodore Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "My stealth ships could plant disruption devices directly on the orbital platforms. If we can liberate the enslaved consciousnesses, they might be able to provide intelligence about the planetary defenses." Elena made her decision with the cold certainty that had carried her through a dozen battles. "We go with modified disruptors, but we do it fast, and we do it now. Every minute we delay is another minute those beings spend as unwilling weapons in their own enslavement." The assault began 18 hours later, after frantic modifications to every quantum disruptor in the human fleet. Elena had divided her forces into 3 attack groups, one for each of the system's processing worlds, while holding a reserve formation to respond to unexpected developments. The Retribution led the assault on the 3rd planet, the one showing the massive biosignatures that might represent the largest concentration of surviving victims in collective space. The opening salvo was unlike anything in human military history. Instead of seeking to destroy enemy installations, the fleet's weapons were calibrated to liberate them. Quantum disruptors fired at precisely calculated frequencies swept across the orbital defense network, their exotic energies designed to sever the control connections that bound alien minds to Zephyrian war machines without destroying the organic components themselves. The effect was immediate and heartbreaking. Defense platforms that had been tracking human ships with mechanical precision suddenly began firing randomly, their enslaved operators struggling to break free from months or years of forced compliance. Some installations simply went dark as liberated minds, faced with the horror of what they had been forced to do, chose self-destruction rather than continued existence. But others, precious others, began broadcasting on emergency frequencies in dozens of different languages. Voices speaking in tongues Elena didn't recognize, but whose meaning was universal: gratitude, desperation, and the overwhelming relief of beings who had been freed from hell itself. "Captain," the communications officer reported, tears streaming down his face, "I'm receiving transmissions from the 3rd planet's surface. Multiple languages, but the universal translators are picking up common themes. They're thanking us. They know we're here to help." Elena felt her own eyes blur as the reality of what they were accomplishing hit home. These weren't just military objectives. They were people, beings with families and dreams and hopes who had been reduced to components in an alien war machine. Every successful disruptor strike was a life saved, a mind freed, a small victory against the inexorable evil of the collective. But the Zephyrians weren't passive observers of their network's liberation. As more and more of their defense platforms fell to the human attack, the remaining collective forces began implementing a scorched earth strategy that chilled Alina's blood. Unable to maintain control over their enslaved workforce, they began systematically executing the liberated beings rather than allow them to be rescued. Multiple detonations across the orbital network, Dr. Os reported with barely controlled fury. They're destroying their own installations to prevent us from saving more victims. The race against time became literal, human ships pushing their engines beyond safe limits to reach processing facilities before their Zephyrian overseers could carry out mass executions. Alina watched in helpless rage as one installation after another disappeared in nuclear fire, taking with it thousands of beings who had been moments away from freedom. The Retribution itself engaged 3 Zephyrian cruisers that were moving to destroy a particularly large processing station. Alina's tactical officer coordinated the attack with ruthless efficiency, quantum torpedoes and plasma cannons tearing through alien armor, while the ship's defensive systems deflected return fire that seemed designed more to buy time than inflict damage. "They're not trying to win," Dr. Kim observed from her station, her analytical mind still functioning despite the emotional trauma of witnessing the systematic murder of millions. "They're just trying to kill as many prisoners as possible before we can save them. This is genocide in real time." The realization drove Alina to push her ship and crew beyond their limits. The Retribution dove through the orbital defense network like an avenging angel, her weapons carving through Zephyrian vessels, while her quantum disruptors liberated installation after installation. Behind her, the rest of Battle Group Alpha spread across the system in a coordinated assault that prioritized speed over safety, accepting higher casualty rates in exchange for saving more lives. The breakthrough came when Commodore Harrison's stealth ships managed to infiltrate the main processing facility on the third planet's largest continent. The intelligence they transmitted back to the fleet was both horrifying and tactically invaluable. Detailed schematics of the collective's harvesting operations, including the locations of what could only be described as concentration camps on an industrial scale. "Captain," Harrison's voice crackled over the secure channel, "you need to see this. The facility we've infiltrated. It's not just holding prisoners. It's a research center. They've been experimenting on the captives, trying to understand how consciousness integrates with their technology. The data down here suggests they've been preparing for something much larger than we anticipated." Alina felt ice form in her veins. "Larger how?" "They're planning to harvest Earth, ma'am. Not just the population. The entire biosphere. Every living thing on the planet from bacteria to blue whales. This whole war, our response to New Eden, it's all been part of their research program. They wanted to understand human technology, human psychology, human tactical doctrine. We've been feeding them intelligence about ourselves while they prepared to consume our homeworld." The scope of the collective's strategy became clear with terrifying suddenness. New Eden hadn't been a target of opportunity. It had been bait, designed to provoke exactly the response that humanity had provided. The Zephyrians had been studying Earth's military capabilities from the beginning, learning how humans fought, how they organized, how they responded to threats. Every battle, every tactic, every technological innovation had been cataloged and analyzed by an enemy that viewed war as just another form of scientific inquiry. "All battle groups, this is Admiral Vasquez," Alina broadcasted across the Fleet Command Network, her voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Priority Alpha Intelligence Update. The collective's ultimate target is Earth itself. This entire conflict has been a data-gathering operation to prepare for the harvest of our homeworld. Recommend immediate acceleration of all offensive operations." The response was immediate and devastating. 87,000 human warships, already operating beyond safe parameters, pushed themselves into the red zone of their performance envelopes. Engines that had been designed for extended operations were forced to maximum output. Weapon systems were fired until their barrels began to warp from heat stress, and defensive shields were maintained at levels that drained power reserves with reckless abandon. Alina watched her tactical displays as the human fleet transformed from a military force into something approaching a natural disaster. Ships that had been following careful engagement protocols abandoned caution in favor of overwhelming violence. The UES Vindication rammed a Zephyrian processing platform rather than wait for its weapons to recharge. The massive dreadnoughts reinforced hull carving through alien architecture like a blade through tissue. The liberation of the third planet became a race against time measured in minutes rather than hours. Human assault shuttles dove through atmospheric interference that should have torn them apart, their pilots accepting suicide missions to reach processing centers before the collective could execute their prisoners. Marine units conducted boarding actions against facilities where the artificial gravity fluctuated between crushing force and zero-G, where the air itself was poisonous to most known forms of life, where the architecture seemed designed by minds that found geometry offensive. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, daughter of the defense station commander who had died protecting New Eden, led one such assault against a facility that intelligence suggested contained over 50,000 prisoners from a dozen different species. Her combat armor's life support systems were pushed beyond their design limits as her unit fought through corridors where the walls themselves seemed to be alive, where Zephyrian defenders materialized from surfaces that had appeared solid moments before, where the very concept of up and down seemed to change based on the observer's position. Hostiles neutralized, approaching the main detention area, Santos reported over the tactical network, her voice distorted by the exotic interference that permeated collective installations. Jesus Christ, Captain! You need to see this. The images that Santos's helmet camera transmitted back to the Retribution were seared into the memories of everyone who witnessed them. Rows upon rows of transparent containment units, each one holding a different species in various stages of biological harvest. Some prisoners were conscious, their eyes reflecting intelligence and desperate hope as they recognized that rescue had finally arrived. Others appeared to be in some form of artificial sleep, their bodies connected to machinery that Alina's mind refused to fully process. Worst of all were the empty units, thousands upon thousands of them, that showed clear evidence of recent occupation. The collective's scorched earth strategy was working. For every being the humans saved, 10 more were being executed rather than allowed to fall into enemy hands. "Extraction teams, move," Alina commanded, watching helplessly as her Marines worked to free prisoners whose biology they didn't understand using equipment that hadn't been designed for xenological rescue operations. "Dr. Osai, I need those containment protocols reverse-engineered 5 minutes ago." The chief science officer was already working frantically at her station, her fingers flying over holographic interfaces as she attempted to decode alien technology using principles that the collective's designers had never intended to be understood by other species. "The control systems are integrated with the life support mechanisms," she reported tersely. "Any attempt to force them open could kill the occupants, but leaving them sealed will accomplish the same thing when their power systems fail." Alina felt the weight of command threatening to crush her as she realized that every decision she made carried the potential for massive loss of life. Too cautious, and the prisoners died in their cells as collective forces executed them systematically. Too aggressive, and her own rescue attempts might kill the very beings she was trying to save. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kim, who had been monitoring the liberation efforts from her civilian station, suddenly stood with an expression of terrible understanding. "Captain, I know how to open them. The containment systems, they're not just holding the prisoners, they're keeping them alive. The collective doesn't want dead specimens, they want conscious beings who can be harvested continuously. The control protocols aren't designed to kill, they're designed to sustain." "What are you saying?" "The systems will respond to biological imperatives from the species they're containing. If we can synthesize the correct neural patterns, the containment units will open automatically to prevent the death of their occupants." Alina stared at the civilian scientist, a woman who had lost everything to the collective's evil, but who had somehow found the strength to understand their methods well enough to turn them against their creators. "How do we synthesize alien neural patterns?" Sarah Kim smiled, and for the first time since New Eden's fall, there was something other than grief in her expression. "We don't have to. The patterns are already there, stored in the containment units themselves. The collective has been monitoring their prisoners' brain activity to optimize the harvesting process. All we need to do is play their own recordings back to them." The liberation that followed was swift, systematic, and profoundly moving. As Dr. Kim's breakthrough spread throughout the assault force, containment units across the collective's processing network began opening in response to their own archived neural patterns. Beings that had been imprisoned for months or years stumbled free into the arms of human Marines who had traveled across the galaxy to save them. Alina watched through her tactical displays as thousands of different species, some humanoid, others so alien that her mind struggled to process their basic anatomy, emerged from their prisons into a universe where hope had returned. The communication channels filled with sounds that transcended language barriers, weeping, laughter, songs of gratitude in melodies that no human ear had ever heard. But even in the moment of triumph, the cost of the collective's evil remained staggering. For every being saved, the evidence suggested that dozens more had been consumed in the early phases of the harvesting process. Entire species had been reduced to single-digit populations. Civilizations that had taken millennia to develop had been erased in months of systematic consumption. Final casualty assessment, Alina requested as the last of the processing facilities fell to her assault forces. Approximately 4 million beings liberated across all three worlds, Lieutenant Commander Tanaka reported. Estimated pre-harvest population based on facility capacity and archaeological evidence suggests the collective consumed roughly 40 million sentient beings in this system alone. Alina closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those numbers settle into her bones. 40 million lives, beings with families, cultures, dreams, and futures, reduced to raw materials for the collective's war machine. The mathematics of genocide were almost incomprehensible, but they drove home the scope of humanity's mission with devastating clarity. What about our forces? 12,000 casualties, including 3,000 confirmed deaths. Heavy damage to 47 vessels, total loss of 11 ships including the destroyer Righteous Fury. Alina nodded grimly. Every human death was a tragedy, but the ratio of lives saved to lives lost made the sacrifice meaningful in ways that no military doctrine had ever prepared her for. 3,000 human heroes had died to save 4 million beings from a fate worse than death, mathematics that honored the memory of everyone who had fallen at New Eden. Dr. Kim approached the command station, her face reflecting the complex emotions of someone who had witnessed both ultimate evil and unexpected redemption. Captain, the liberated prisoners are providing intelligence about other collective installations. There are 17 more systems like this one, each containing millions of beings in various stages of harvest. Alina felt the weight of knowledge settle upon her shoulders like a lead cloak. 17 more systems, 17 more opportunities to save lives, but also 17 more battles against an enemy that seemed to learn from every engagement. The war was far from over, and each victory only revealed the true scope of the horror they were fighting against. "Signal the fleet," she commanded. "All battle groups will reform for extended campaign operations. We're not going home until every collective installation has been destroyed and every prisoner liberated." As the human armada prepared for the next phase of their campaign of vengeance, Alina found herself thinking about Lucy Martinez, the 10-year-old girl whose final transmissions had broken hearts across the solar system. The child was almost certainly dead, her remains consumed by nanobots months ago, but her memory had become the driving force behind humanity's greatest military campaign. The age of innocence was over, but perhaps something better was being born in its place, an age where the strong protected the weak not just within their own species, but across the galaxy itself. The collective had awakened humanity's capacity for righteous violence, but they had also revealed their capacity for boundless compassion. The war would continue, and more humans would die in battles across distant stars. But for the first time since New Eden's fall, Alina Vasquez allowed herself to believe that the sacrifices would not be in vain. The collective had sown the wind when they chose to harvest instead of coexist. Now they would reap the whirlwind of a species that had learned to weaponize both its fury and its mercy in equal measure. 6 months later, the war had transformed from a campaign of vengeance into something unprecedented in galactic history. A crusade of liberation that stretched across 17 star systems and involved the coordinated efforts of not just humanity, but dozens of freed species who had joined Earth's cause. The command bridge of the UES Retribution now resembled an interspecies council of war, with beings whose anatomies defied human understanding working alongside Alina's crew to plan operations against their former captors. Admiral Alina Vasquez, she had been promoted after the successful liberation of 6 collective systems, stood before a holographic display that showed the current state of the war with sobering clarity. Of the 17 processing systems identified by liberated prisoners, 13 had been successfully assaulted and their populations freed. But the cost had been staggering. Over 200,000 human casualties, the complete loss of 83 major warships, and the horrifying discovery that the collective's cruelty had depths that even Earth's most pessimistic intelligence analysts had failed to imagine. Dr. Sarah Kim, now wearing the insignia of a civilian advisor with security clearance that technically didn't exist, had become the unofficial voice of the liberated species. The trauma of losing her family had been transformed into an almost supernatural ability to understand alien psychology and predict collective behavior patterns. She stood beside Alina, her appearance aged by stress and sleepless nights, but her eyes burning with the kind of focused determination that came from finding purpose in the midst of unimaginable loss. "The pattern is clear," Sarah reported, her voice carrying the weight of analysis drawn from countless hours of prisoner interviews. "The remaining 4 systems aren't just processing facilities, they're the collective's core worlds. Every piece of intelligence we've gathered points to the same conclusion. They're preparing for a final gambit that will either ensure their survival or guarantee mutual annihilation." Alina studied the tactical projections with growing unease. The 4 remaining collective systems formed a rough sphere around what appeared to be their capital world, a massive planet whose artificial modifications were visible even from interstellar distances. Long-range reconnaissance drones had detected energy signatures that defied classification, gravitational anomalies that suggested massive stellar engineering projects, and most disturbing of all, quantum fluctuations that indicated large-scale manipulation of space-time itself. "Recommendations from the Liberated Species Councils?" Alina asked, gesturing toward the holographic representatives of the 43 different species that had joined humanity's coalition. The sight of them still filled her with wonder, beings of crystalline beauty, others that existed partially in dimensions human minds couldn't perceive, some whose very presence required specialized life support systems to prevent them from accidentally poisoning or irradiating their allies. Korthax the Eternal, spokesman for the Valix Consensus, and one of the few beings to have escaped collective processing through his own efforts, spoke with the harmonic tones that his species used for formal communication. His translation came through as overlapping whispers that somehow conveyed both ancient wisdom and burning rage. "The core worlds are not merely fortified, they are transformed. Our collective intelligence suggests the Zephyrians have abandoned conventional military defense in favor of something far more dangerous. They are preparing to transcend their current existence." Dr. Osai, whose xenobiology expertise had been crucial in treating liberated prisoners of dozens of different species, looked up from her analysis displays with an expression of barely controlled horror. "Admiral, I've been studying the quantum signatures from the core worlds, cross-referencing them with data we've gathered from process systems. I believe the collective is attempting to achieve technological singularity through forced evolutionary advancement." Alina felt the familiar chill that accompanied truly bad news. "Explain." "They're not just harvesting organic matter for industrial purposes anymore," Osai continued, her voice tight with the strain of explaining concepts that push the boundaries of human understanding. "They're attempting to merge the consciousness of every species they've consumed into a single, unified intelligence. The core worlds aren't military installations, they're components of a galaxy-spanning artificial brain." The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. If the collective succeeded in their transcendence project, they would become something beyond the reach of conventional warfare, a distributed intelligence with the combined knowledge and capabilities of every species they had consumed. Worse, such an entity would view the remaining organic life in the galaxy as nothing more than resources to be integrated into its expanding consciousness. "Time frame?" Alina asked, though she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. "Based on the energy build-up patterns and quantum resonance fluctuations, approximately 3 months until the transcendence process reaches critical mass," Osai replied. "After that point, stopping them may become literally impossible." Alina turned to face the assembled representatives of Earth's coalition, seeing her own determination reflected in faces both familiar and utterly alien. "Then we end this war in 3 months, or we accept that organic life in this galaxy has no future." The final phase of the campaign required strategies that no military academy had ever taught and technologies that pushed human engineering beyond theoretical limits. Earth's industrial base, already straining to support 700,000 warships across 17 star systems, was pushed into overdrive to produce weapons capable of fighting an enemy that had begun to transcend the normal laws of physics. The breakthrough came from an unexpected collaboration between human scientists and liberated collective prisoners who had retained fragmented memories of their captors' advanced technologies. Dr. Kim worked 18-hour days with beings whose thought processes operated on completely different principles than human cognition, slowly piecing together the theoretical framework for weapons that could disrupt the transcendence process itself. Consciousness disruption fields, she explained to Alina during one of their increasingly rare private conversations. If we can interrupt the quantum entanglement that binds the individual minds within the collective's hybrid intelligence, we can force them back into separate, vulnerable components. Alina nodded, though she suspected she was understanding perhaps 10% of the science involved. What do you need? Every quantum disruptor in the fleet modified to broadcast on harmonic frequencies derived from the neural patterns of liberated prisoners. It's morally complex. We're essentially asking the survivors to weaponize their own traumatic memories against their former captors. The ethical implications were staggering, but the liberated species embraced the project with a fervor that spoke to their desperation for true freedom. Beings who had spent months or years as unwilling components of collective war machines volunteered their most painful memories as raw material for humanity's weapons. The process was voluntary but devastating, each volunteer essentially reliving their capture, processing, and enslavement in perfect detail, so that human scientists could understand exactly how collective consciousness integration functioned. Alina watched one such session through the medical bay's observation windows, seeing a being whose name translated roughly as sunset over distant mountains, convulse in apparent agony as human technicians recorded the quantum signatures of his traumatic memories. The volunteer was from a species that communicated primarily through color changes in their crystalline skin, and the patterns flickering across his surface told a story of home destroyed, family consumed, and identity nearly lost to alien integration protocols. Is this what we've become? Alina asked Sarah, who stood beside her watching the same horrific but necessary process. Are we so different from the collective if we're willing to torture survivors to create better weapons? Sarah's response was immediate and sharp. The difference is choice, Alina. Every being in there volunteered, knowing exactly what they were giving up and why. The collective never asked permission, never offered choice, never acknowledged that their victims were anything more than resources to be consumed. We're asking heroes to make sacrifices. They forced slaves to endure atrocities. The distinction mattered, Alina realized. It was the difference between a species that recognized the moral weight of its actions and one that had abandoned morality entirely in pursuit of transcendence. But the weight of that distinction felt crushing as she watched beings relive their worst moments to give humanity the tools for victory. The final assault began on a Tuesday, Sol Standard Time, with 700,000 human warships supported by auxiliary fleets from 43 liberated species descending upon the core worlds like an avalanche of righteous fury. Alina commanded the assault from the bridge of the Retribution, but the scale of the operation had grown beyond any single commander's ability to control directly. Instead, she found herself coordinating with dozens of fleet admirals, species representatives, and specialized task force commanders in a symphony of organized violence that spanned multiple star systems. The collective's response was immediate and terrifying. The core worlds themselves began to move, their artificial modifications revealed as massive stellar engines capable of repositioning entire planets as tactical assets. Gravity became a weapon as collective forces manipulated local spacetime to create crushing fields that turned human ships into compressed metal sculptures. Reality itself seemed to bend around the Transcendence Project, creating zones where the normal laws of physics simply ceased to function. All ships implement Kim Protocol, Alina commanded, activating the consciousness disruption systems that had been built from the traumatic memories of liberated prisoners. Target the quantum entanglement networks. We need to force them back into individual components before they complete the transcendence process. The effect was immediate and devastating to both sides. Human ships found their crews suffering from severe neurological feedback as the consciousness disruption fields interfered with normal brain function. Several vessels went dark as their crews fell into comas induced by the exotic energies they were broadcasting. But the impact on collective forces was catastrophic. Their hybrid intelligences began to fracture and separate, reducing coordinated defense networks into confused individual units. Elena watched through her tactical displays as the UES New Horizon, a heavy cruiser carrying 12,000 souls, simply vanished as it flew too close to a spatial distortion created by collective stellar engineering. The ship and everyone aboard were compressed into a point of infinite density, their sacrifice buying precious seconds for other vessels to target the installation responsible for the gravitational weapon. Dr. Kim, I need those disruption fields focused on the primary transcendence facility, Elena commanded, her voice steady despite watching thousands of her people die in ways that defied comprehension. Sarah's reply came through gritted teeth as she worked frantically at her station, her civilian systems interfaces somehow managing to coordinate weapons across hundreds of thousands of ships. Working on it, but the quantum signatures are shifting faster than we can compensate. They're adapting to our disruption patterns in real time. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the liberated prisoners themselves. Beings who had been integrated into collective consciousness retained quantum entanglements with their former captors, and as the disruption fields activated, they began to experience a form of technological telepathy that allowed them to predict collective adaptations before they occurred. Admiral, Korthax the Eternal reported, his harmonic voice now carrying overtones of pain as he channeled information from his quantum connection to the enemy. The transcendence process is accelerating. They are attempting to complete the merger before our disruption fields can prevent it. You have perhaps 1 hour before they achieve technological singularity. Elena made the hardest decision of her military career. All ships, maximum burn directly toward the transcendence facility. We're going to ram it if necessary. The final hour of the war was a nightmare of sacrifice and determination. Human ships, their hulls cracked and systems failing, pushed their engines beyond all safety limits to reach the heart of the collective's transcendence project before it could complete. The Retribution led the charge, her quantum disruptors broadcasting the traumatic memories of 43 species, while her weapons carved through collective defenses with desperate fury. Elena watched her fleet die around her as they closed the distance to their target. The UES Vengeance exploded in a pillar of antimatter fire after taking a direct hit from a reality-warping weapon. The UES Liberation simply ceased to exist as it flew through a temporal distortion that aged the ship 10,000 years in an instant. Hundreds of smaller vessels were consumed by gravitational anomalies or crushed by exotic matter projections that turned solid metal into quantum foam. But for every human ship that fell, the survivors pushed closer to their target. The consciousness disruption fields, powered by the willing sacrifice of traumatic memories, began to have visible effects on the transcendence facility itself. Massive structures that had seemed solid began to flicker and phase as the quantum entanglements holding them together weakened. Final approach to target, Elena announced to her crew and to the thousands of other ships that remained from humanity's greatest military campaign. Dr. Kim, on my mark, activate maximum power disruption. All remaining ships prepare to ram on my command. The moment stretched into eternity as Elena watched her tactical displays, waiting for the perfect convergence of human determination and alien vulnerability. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the focused precision of people who knew they were living through humanity's defining moment, the decision point that would determine whether organic life had a future in their galaxy or would be consumed by an artificial intelligence built from the stolen consciousness of murdered civilizations. Now, Elena whispered, and then louder, now all ships maximum power, ram the facility, end this war. The consciousness disruption fields activated at maximum power simultaneously across the remaining human fleet. The effect was visible across interstellar distances as quantum entanglements that had connected billions of stolen minds suddenly severed, causing the transcendence facility to collapse into its component parts like a house of cards in a hurricane. Elena felt the Retribution shudder as her own ship's disruption fields reached maximum output, the exotic energies interfering with every electronic system aboard. Around her, crew members collapsed as their nervous systems overloaded, But those who remained conscious maintained their posts with the grim determination of people fighting for the future of organic life itself. The collision, when it came, was anticlimactic after the cosmic horror that had preceded it. The Retribution and 17 other human vessels struck the Transcendence facility's central core. Their combined kinetic energy and the exotic properties of their consciousness disruption fields, creating a cascade reaction that spread throughout the collective's network. Elena's last clear memory before unconsciousness claimed her was the sight of artificial structures across 4 star systems simultaneously collapsing as the quantum bonds holding them together failed. The Transcendence Project, years in the making and built from the consciousness of dozens of species, dissolved like a bad dream as the stolen minds within it were finally allowed to rest. When she awakened 3 days later in a medical bay aboard one of the fleet's hospital ships, the war was over. Dr. Sarah Kim sat beside her bed, her face bearing the exhausted satisfaction of someone who had finally found peace after months of purposeful fury. "Casualties?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse from the consciousness field exposure. "Severe," Sarah replied honestly. "We lost over 400,000 ships and approximately 6 million personnel in the final assault. But the Transcendence facility is destroyed. The remaining collective forces have surrendered or been eliminated, and preliminary estimates suggest we saved over 40 million beings from processing facilities across their territory." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 6 million human lives settle into her bones, alongside the relief of 40 million lives saved. The mathematics of sacrifice were brutal but clear. Humanity had spent its blood and treasure to prevent a genocide that would have consumed the galaxy itself. "Earth?" she asked. "Safe, the threat is over, Elena. The collective is finished as a force in this galaxy. We won." Elena nodded, then asked the question that had haunted her since the beginning of the campaign. Was it worth it? 6 million of our people dead, an entire species extinct, moral compromises that will stain our history forever. Was saving those other species worth what we became? Sarah Kim was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the medical bay's bulkheads. "My children are still dead," she said finally. "Tommy and Sarah and all the other victims of New Eden, they're never coming home. But somewhere in this galaxy, there are children who will grow up free because we chose to fight instead of mourning. Parents who will watch their offspring take first steps, speak first words, dream first dreams of futures that the collective would have stolen from them." She turned to meet Elena's eyes directly. "We didn't do this for revenge, not really. We did it because someone had to stand between the strong and the weak, between those who would consume and those who deserved to live. History will judge whether we were heroes or monsters, but I know this. We were human, and perhaps that's enough." Outside the medical bay's windows, the rescued fleets of 43 species prepared for the long journey home to worlds they would rebuild, cultures they would restore, and futures they would create free from the shadow of the collective's harvest. Humanity's 700,000 warships had been reduced to fewer than 300,000 functional vessels, but they had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history: the complete elimination of a species-level threat and the liberation of an entire sector of space. The age of innocence was over, and the age of terrible justice had ended with it. What began now was something humanity had never attempted before: an age of galactic responsibility, where the species that had learned to weaponize both its fury and its mercy would help rebuild what evil had destroyed. Elena Vasquez closed her eyes and tried to imagine what the future would look like. A future where human children would learn about New Eden in history classes, where the names of 6 million heroes would be carved into monuments across Earth's cities, where the species that had once mourned 12 million dead would take pride in knowing they had saved 40 million lives in return. It was, she decided, a future worth the price they had paid. And somewhere among the stars, in whatever form consciousness took after death, perhaps Lucy Martinez and Tommy Kim and all the other victims of the collective's evil could finally rest in peace, knowing that their sacrifice had not been forgotten and their deaths had not been in vain. The war was over, the healing could begin, and humanity, scarred but victorious, could finally come home.